There is a kind of fear that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with raised voices or running footsteps, or the sharp smell of danger in the air. It comes quietly, the way cold comes, not all at once but in degrees, settling into the spaces between things, until one morning you wake and realize that the world around you has been frozen for a long time, and you simply did not notice because you were already so used to being cold. I was born into that kind of fear. Not my fear. Theirs. The fear of every wolf in the Caldenmere pack who looked at my eyes. One silver, one gold, and saw something they had been taught, for generations, to destroy on sight. The fear of men who had built their entire order on the certainty that what ran in my blood should not exist. That I should not exist. They called it the forbidden bloodline. They spoke of it in the same tone they used for old catastrophes, floods, plagues, wars that had broken territories in half. They had been trying to erase it for 100 years. They had not finished. I was the proof. And tonight, they had finally decided to correct that. Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. Chapter 1. The torch came through the window first. I was already awake. I had not slept, had not even tried, because something in the base of my skull had been humming a warning since sundown. That deep animal frequency that has no name, but that every wolf knows. The frequency that says, tonight is different. Tonight they mean it. The torch hit the floor of my room, and the dry straw I slept on caught immediately, orange blooming into the dark with a sound like a held breath releasing, and I was already moving, rolling away from the heat, hitting the wall, pressing myself upright in the 2 seconds before the smoke reached my throat. My name is Ziva. I am 20 years old. I have lived in the Caldenmere pack my entire life, in a one-room structure at the edge of the settlement that was not quite a house and not quite a prison, but carried the qualities of both. I have a silver eye and a gold eye and blood in my veins that the pack's high elder had declared, at my birth, an abomination against the natural order of wolf law. He had wanted to kill me then. My mother had bargained for my life with the only currency she had, and I had never fully understood what that currency was, because she had died when I was 6, and taken the knowledge with her. Now, standing in the burning room at the edge of Caldenmere, I understood that the bargain had simply been deferred. I hit the door with my shoulder. Locked. They had locked it from outside, which meant this was not opportunistic, not a single angry wolf acting without sanction. This was organized. This was agreed upon. This was the pack deciding, collectively, that the deferral was over. The smoke was thickening. My eyes were watering, not from fear, from the physical reality of burning. And I pressed my sleeve over my mouth and looked at the window. Small, high. The torch had come through the shutter, which meant the shutter was open. I dragged the straw pallet, what wasn't burning, to the wall below the window, and climbed it and reached the sill and pulled myself up with both arms, screaming from the effort, and got one leg through, and then stopped. Because there were 3 of them outside, standing in the dark beyond the firelight, watching. Not warriors, no drawn weapons, no armor. Elder Kovath's men. The ones who carried out his quiet orders. The ones who had watched my door for years with the particular patience of people who have been told their moment will come. Their moment had come. "Come down, girl," the one in the center said. His name was Dressed. I knew his face. I had grown up knowing all their faces. "Come down, and it will be quick." The fire was hot against my back. I looked at Dressed's face, and I thought about Quick, and I thought about my mother bargaining for my life with a currency I would never know. And something in me that had been quiet for a very long time went absolutely still, and then absolute incandescent with rage. I jumped, not down, sideways. The gap between the burning structure and the wood store beside it was less than a body's width, and I had spent 20 years moving through the margins of this settlement in the dark, and I knew every gap and every shadow and every route that a person who has spent their whole life planning for the moment they need to run has mapped without knowing she was mapping. I landed on the wood store roof. I heard Dressed shout behind me. I ran. The settlement was dark except for my burning room, which was now throwing orange light across the nearest buildings and casting everything in the moving shadows of something being destroyed. I ran through those shadows, barefoot on cold ground, in the thin sleeping dress I had worn to bed, in the futile hope that tonight would be an ordinary night. And behind me, I could hear them. More than 3 now, more feet than I had expected, which meant the gathering had been larger than I knew. I ran for the tree line. The forest beyond Caldenmere's northern border was called the Greywood. It was old, older than the pack, older than Wolflaw, a dark and dense tangle of black-barked trees that had been standing since before anyone alive could remember. The pack did not go into the Greywood at night. The stories about why were various and mostly centered on the same essential point. Things lived in the Greywood that were older and less negotiable than wolves. I had always found this reassuring. I hit the tree line and kept running, and the darkness of the Greywood closed over me like water closing over a stone, and behind me I heard the pursuit hesitate. The footsteps slowing, voices conferring, and then stopping entirely at the border. I ran until I couldn't hear them. Then I ran further. The Greywood was cold and utterly lightless under the canopy, and I ran by memory, and by the particular sensitivity that years of navigating in the dark had given me. The slight changes in ground beneath my feet, the sound of my own breathing bouncing differently off trees and clearings. I had been in this forest before, many times. Alone, always, because no one else would come here, and aloneness was the one thing I had always been able to find in abundance. I didn't stop until I reached the stream. It was deep in the forest, maybe 2 miles from the settlement edge, where the black-barked trees thinned slightly, and the ground sloped down to a narrow cut of moving water that was cold enough even in summer to make your teeth ache. I dropped to my knees at its edge and pressed both hands into it and breathed. The fire on my back was gone. The smoke in my lungs was not. I coughed until my ribs hurt and pressed my forehead to the cold ground beside the water and breathed in the smell of damp earth and pine root and the specific green, cold smell of very old forest. Safe. For now. For minutes, maybe. Not for long. I sat back on my heels and pressed my wet hands to my face and thought about what I had and what I didn't. No shoes, no cloak, no food, no pack, not the bag kind and not the wolf kind, the latter of which had made its feelings about my existence abundantly clear tonight. Silver eye and gold eye, and blood they wanted to spill. And the Greywood, which did not want to kill me, which made it the most hospitable place I had ever lived. I looked up through the gap in the canopy. The sky was deep black and full of stars, and in the silence, after the running and the fire, and the sound of organized hatred at my heels, I heard something I had not expected. Hoofbeats. Distant, but coming closer. Not from the direction of Caldenmere. From the west. From the Dravenmore Road. My wolf, the part of me they had spent 20 years trying to make believe it had no right to exist, lifted her head, and this time, she did not lower it. Chapter 2. I was not supposed to survive my own birth. I know this not because anyone told me kindly, in the manner of a family sharing difficult history, but because I grew up in a settlement where information about me was never withheld out of consideration for my feelings. The pack did not protect me from the truth of my own existence. The truth of my own existence was, in fact, their primary argument for ending it. The forbidden bloodline was not a myth. It was a history, a long, documented, carefully maintained history that the Caldenmere Pack's Elder Council kept in a sealed record going back 11 generations. I had never read it. I had never been permitted near it. But I had pieced together its contents the way I had pieced together most of my knowledge of my own life. Through fragments, overheard conversations, the things people say when they believe a girl in the corner is too unimportant to listen. 11 generations ago, a wolf named Soren had made a bond that the pack law of the time forbade. Not with a human. The law around that was different, older, about something other than bloodlines. He had bonded with a woman who carried the blood of the old seers. The ones who had existed before pack law codified itself into the rigid territorial architecture the 5 wolf domains now operated under. The seers had been wolves of a different kind. Their gifts were not in strength or speed or dominance, but in something harder to name and therefore harder to control. They saw things. Not visions exactly. Not prophecy in the theatrical sense. They read the living world the way other wolves read scent, completely, instinctually, with a precision that made them more dangerous to the structures of power than any warrior. The elder councils of that generation had decided, with the particular decisive brutality of people who have convinced themselves they are protecting order, that the seer bloodline needed to end. They nearly succeeded. Soren's children were taken. Some killed, some scattered, driven from their packs into the unmapped territories between domains where the law did not reach. For 3 generations, the bloodline dropped below the threshold of visibility, diluted into the broader wolf population, and the elder councils congratulated themselves and closed the record and moved on. But blood does not forget. It surfaces. Generations later, centuries later, a child born with the old eyes, 1 silver, 1 gold, the unmistakable mark of the seer heritage. And every time it surfaced, the council found it and snuffed it out, and added the incident to their sealed record as proof that their vigilance was necessary and their methods were right. I was the 7th such child in 11 generations. The previous 6 had not survived past infancy. My mother's name was Thesson. She was a mid-rank wolf in the Caldenmere pack, unremarkable in the ways the pack used to evaluate worth, not from an important bloodline, not mated to a significant warrior, not possessed of exceptional strength or speed, or any of the visible qualities that earned status. She was quiet and observant, and she kept to herself and no one paid her much attention, which was precisely why no one noticed, until it was too late, that she had spent the better part of a year constructing a very careful plan. When I was born with the eyes, they came for me within the hour. Elder Kovath himself. He was younger then, not yet the hunched, deliberate old stone presence he was now, but already the essential shape of him was clear. A man whose authority was built entirely on the maintenance of fear, and whose deepest terror was anything he could not categorize. My mother was ready for him. I did not know what she had offered. I had tried, over the years, to reconstruct it from the behavior of various pack members toward her in the years that followed. A strangeness in how certain elders avoided her eye. A weight in the way Elder Kovath looked at her that was not quite guilt, but was in the neighborhood of it. Whatever it was significant enough to make him hesitate, to grant a deferral. She had 6 years with me before whatever she had offered was collected. The official record was that she died of fever. I was 6 years old, and I believed it for a long time, because I did not yet have the language for what I was beginning to understand about the world I lived in. By the time I had the language, the evidence was cold, and the pack had moved on, and bringing it up would have accomplished nothing except making me a more immediate problem. So I carried it in silence. I grew up in Caldenmere as a kind of tolerated impossibility. Not integrated, never that. No shared meals or pack ceremonies, or the invisible social fabric that holds a wolf community together. I was adjacent to the pack, proximate to it, allowed to exist at its margins on whatever terms had been set by a bargain I couldn't see. I had 3 things that sustained me across those years. The first was the Greywood. The forest did not care what my eyes looked like. The trees and the stream and the dark, silent, old-growth presence of it were simply there, consistent and unhostile, and in a life almost entirely composed of hostility that was more than enough to make it a refuge. The second was books. Not from the pack. The pack's collection was practical, agricultural, legal. Mine came from a source I had never fully identified. Twice a year, when I returned to my room after a long absence, I would find a small wrapped package on my floor. Inside, always 2 or 3 books. History, mostly. Natural philosophy. The occasional collection of old stories that were not quite legends and not quite records, and sat in the interesting space between them. I had read them all many times, and I had never discovered who left them. The third thing was the knowing. Not visions. not prophecy, just knowing. The way I had known, from the moment I woke that night with the hum in my skull, that tonight was different. The way I had always known things slightly before, I could have logically known them. The weather before it turned, the mood of a room before I entered it, the intentions of people who had learned to keep their faces careful in my presence. It was not always precise or reliable, but it was real, and it was mine, and it was the one part of me that no amount of social erasure had managed to reach. The seer blood. Old and diluted and fighting for expression across 11 generations of suppression. It had known the hoofbeats were coming before I heard them. It had known before I left the stream, before I started moving west through the graywood toward the road, before I broke the tree line and stood in the cold pre-dawn air at the edge of the old trade route and looked north. It had known. And when the riders appeared over the ridge, black and silver in the first thin light, the wolf head sigil on the lead rider's chest, my blood did not ask me whether this was safe or wise or logical. It simply said, there, as if it had been waiting, across all the years, and all the fear and all the narrow surviving, to say exactly that. There. Chapter 3. The lead rider saw me before the others did. He pulled his horse to a stop at the crest of the ridge, and the rest of the party halted behind him in the practiced, synchronized way of people who have ridden together long enough to move, as one body. In the gray pre-dawn light, I could see there were 8 of them, 6 riders flanking 2, and the horses were large and well kept, the kind that spoke of distance traveled, and resources that made distance irrelevant. I stood at the tree line in my sleeping dress with no shoes, and my hair loose from whatever braid I had managed before bed, and my eyes, which I could not hide, and had stopped trying to hide some years ago, open and visible in the early light. The lead rider looked at me for a long moment. Then he dismounted. He was tall, taller than most Caldenmere wolves, which already ran large. And he moved toward me with the unhurried ease of a man who had calculated the geometry of every situation he had ever entered, and found his position in it before taking a single step. He stopped at a distance that was respectful rather than cautious. "You're from Caldenmere," he said. Not a question. He was reading the smoke on my clothes, the direction I'd come from, probably half a dozen other details I hadn't thought to conceal, because I'd been running for my life. "Yes," I said. His eyes moved to mine. He had the disciplined face of someone trained to observe without reacting. But something shifted, very briefly in his expression, when he looked at my eyes. Not revulsion, not the flinch I had received my entire life from Caldenmere wolves when they looked directly at me. Something else. Recognition, almost. "Lord Caedric," he said, inclining his head, introducing himself, I realized, not demanding my name. "Envoy of the Dravenmore throne." I looked at the sigil on his chest. 7 stars on a black field. I had seen that sigil in one of my books, The History of the 5 Wolf Territories, and I had spent more time looking at it than I had at the time understood. "I know who you are," I said. "Where are you going?" "Caldenmere," he said. "On the king's business." Something cold moved through me. "Don't!" His eyes sharpened. "Why?" "The settlement is not safe tonight. There was a fire." I paused. "They were burning my room with me in it." Caedric looked at me steadily. "Who?" "The High Elder's men. Elder Kovath." I met his eyes. "They've been waiting to do it for 20 years. Tonight they decided they were finished waiting." "Why tonight specifically?" I almost smiled. The precision of the question. Not what did you do or why do they want you dead, but why tonight? A man who understood that timing was information. "I don't know yet," I said, "but something changed recently. Something made him decide the deferral was over." Caedric was quiet for a moment. He looked back at the party behind him, at the 2 central riders who had not moved, who had watched this exchange from their horses with very different qualities of attention. One of them was cloaked, and I could not read his face in the gray light. The other was watching me with an intensity that I felt before I turned to look at it. That pressure against the skin, that electric pre-storm weight. My wolf went still. Not the stillness of sleep or patience, the stillness of recognition. "Who is that?" I said very quietly to Kadric. He looked at me for a moment before answering. Something in his expression, the faintest recalibration, as if I had confirmed something he had not been fully certain of until now. "The Alpha King of Dravenmore," he said. I looked at the rider. He had not moved. He was still watching me with that total, focused attention. And even at this distance, 20 feet, 30, the gray morning between us, I felt it like a hand pressed flat against my sternum. Steady, certain, unapologetic. My blood said, "There." I pressed it back down. Old reflex, survival mechanics. Something this strong, this immediate, had to be examined carefully before it could be trusted. "Why is the Alpha King riding to Caldenmere before sunrise?" I asked. Kadric paused. "That," he said carefully, "is a question I think His Majesty should answer himself." He stepped back and gestured toward the riders, and I understood that I was being offered an introduction I had not asked for, and could not entirely refuse standing barefoot at a forest edge, with smoke in my hair. I walked toward the party. The Alpha King dismounted as I approached. He was, the word that came to mind was still, in the way that very deep water is still. Not inactive, but concentrated, everything held below the surface with deliberate control. Dark-haired, broad-shouldered, dressed in traveling black without ornamentation, except the sigil and a blade at his hip that he wore the way practiced warriors wear blades, as a natural extension of the body, not a display. His eyes were the color of deep winter sky, and they were on my face with an attention so complete it was almost a physical sensation. He looked at my eyes. Silver and gold. The mark. The thing that had organized every moment of my existence into a single long act of surviving the world's desire to end me. He did not flinch. He looked at them the way you look at something you have been searching for, with the particular stillness of arrival. "Your name," he said. His voice was low and unhurried, and it moved through me with the same quality as his gaze, complete, unapologetic, as if the world arranged itself around it rather than the other way around. "Ziva," I said. He nodded, the particular nod of a man confirming something already known. "Ziva," he said as if testing the weight of it. "How long have they been trying to kill you?" "Since I was born," I said. "And tonight they came close." "Tonight they locked the door from the outside and threw a torch through the window," I said. "So yes, close." Something moved in his jaw. Not anger. Or not only anger. Something older than anger. Something that looked like the expression of a man who has just seen a wrong that has been running for a very long time and is now within range of his correction. "You're not going back," he said. It was not a question or a command. It was a statement of something already decided, not by him, but by the facts of the situation, and he was simply the one naming them. "I had nothing to go back to," I said. "They burned it." He looked at me for one long, steady moment. "Then come," he said. Simple as that. No ceremony, no negotiation, no performance of the power differential between an Alpha King and a barefoot wolf girl from a border settlement who technically had no pack, no standing, no claim to anything in the architecture of wolf territory law. Just come. My wolf pressed forward, and I pressed her back, and I looked at this man, and his 7-star sigil, and the gray morning opening around us into something that was going to be either the end of my story or its true beginning, and I made the decision I had been unknowingly moving toward for 20 years. I came. Chapter 4. They gave me a cloak. One of the riders, a young woman, the only other woman in the party, with close-cropped hair in an efficient manner that suggested she found sentiment wasteful, dismounted without being asked, and handed me a cloak the color of charcoal wool. It was warm, and it smelled of horse and road dust, and it was the most practical kindness anyone had shown me in recent memory. Her name, she told me with the same efficient brevity, was Fen. She was the king's secondary scout. She remounted before I had finished fastening the cloak and offered no further conversation, which I found deeply comfortable. We rode west along the trade road as the sky lightened by degrees. I had been given a horse, a compact gray mare, steady and unbothered, who accepted my unfamiliarity with riding the way sensible animals accept most human inconsistencies, with patient indifference. I was not a skilled rider. This was not embarrassing to me. You cannot be a skilled rider when you have never owned a horse and have spent your life on foot. Kalen, I knew his name from my books. The Drave bloodline, 11 generations of Alpha Kings, rode ahead with Kadric. They spoke in low voices I could not hear over the wind and the road. I did not try to hear them. I watched the landscape instead, the way I had always watched everything, from the edges, completely. The Greywood fell behind us. Caldenmere was already gone from sight, hidden behind the ridge and the tree line, and I watched it disappear without looking away. Not with grief exactly, though grief was part of it. More with the feeling of setting down something very heavy that you have been carrying for so long, you stopped noticing the weight. My room was ash now. My books, the ones left twice a year by someone I had never identified, were ash. The thin wool blanket and the single change of clothes and the small carved stone I had kept on the windowsill since I was 9 years old. The one shaped like a running wolf that I had found in the Greywood and kept without knowing why. All ash. I thought about what was not ash. The knowing, which lived in my blood and my skin and was not flammable. The 20 years of watching and remembering and surviving in the specific way of someone who has been told their existence is an error and has quietly, relentlessly disagreed. Those were mine. Those were coming with me. After perhaps an hour, Kalen dropped back and rode beside me. He did this without announcement or transition, simply moved his horse alongside mine and adjusted to the same pace and looked at the road ahead rather than at me, which I found easier than being looked at directly. "You knew we were coming," he said. I considered denying it. Old reflex again. Deny the things that make you a target. But I was leaving that life behind on the ridge back there. I felt something change, I said. Before I heard the horses. Something coming from the west. The knowing. I looked at him sideways. You know what it is. I know what it's called. He was quiet for a moment. My grandmother was a historian of the old bloodlines. She kept records the elder councils didn't know existed. I've read them. He paused. I've been looking for you for 3 years. The cloak suddenly felt insufficient against the cold. Looking for me specifically? Looking for the Varenzi bloodline, the Seer Wolves, the ones the councils have been erasing since before my grandfather's time. His voice had a controlled, even quality that I was beginning to understand was not coldness, but the opposite. The specific control of someone who feels things deeply and has learned, through necessity, to manage the expression of that depth. I knew there was a surviving descendant somewhere in the border packs. Kadric has been tracing the records for 2 years. And when you found Caldenmere, we received word 4 days ago that Elder Kovath had called a closed gathering. He looked at me then, briefly. We knew what that meant. 4 days. They had ridden 4 days to stop it. I thought about the timing, about what had changed recently, about why tonight had been the night, about a sealed record in an elder council hall and someone, somewhere, who had discovered that the Alpha King of Dravenmore was asking questions about surviving Seer bloodlines. Kovath found out you were looking, I said slowly. Yes. A weight in the word. So he decided to eliminate the evidence before you arrived. Yes. I sat with that for a moment. The shape of it. The 20 years of my survival reduced in the end to a race between an old man's fear and a king's 3-year search, and the margin between them measured in hours. If I had not run immediately, if I had tried to hide inside the building, tried to break the door rather than the window, if the Greywood had slowed me or the stream had been swollen from rain, hours, minutes maybe. Why? I said. Not why were they trying to kill me. I knew that. Why were you looking? What does the Alpha King of Dravenmore want with the Varenzi bloodline? He was quiet for long enough that I thought he might not answer, "The seer wolves were not destroyed because they were dangerous," he said finally. "They were destroyed because they were necessary. There is a difference." He looked at the road ahead. "The old territory agreements, the ones that have held the 5 domains in balance for 11 generations, were originally arbitrated by seer wolves, not by alpha kings. The kings enforced. The seers read the living truth beneath the politics and told the kings what was real versus what was convenient." He paused. "We have had no seers for 100 years, and in the last decade, the territory agreements have been fracturing, quietly, at the edges. Things the councils cover up and manage and pretend are not happening." "What things?" "Border conflicts, bloodline disputes. A pack in the Eastern Domain that disappeared entirely last winter, with no explanation anyone will officially acknowledge." His jaw was tight. "I have been making decisions with incomplete information for 10 years, and the incompleteness is not an accident. It is the direct result of what the councils did a century ago, when they decided that truth was less useful than control." I looked at him, at the side of his face, the dark hair and the winter sky eyes, and the scar along his neck that disappeared into his collar, the one I had noticed in the gray light when I first approached, and had wondered about since. "You want a seer," I said. "I want someone who can tell me what is actually happening in my own territories," he said. "Yes. I'm not a seer in the way the records describe. I'm diluted, 7 generations removed. I get feelings, impressions. Sometimes I know things slightly before I can logically know them." I paused. "I can't read the future." "I don't need the future," he said. "I need someone who can read what's in front of us without the distortion of politics or power or fear." He looked at me then, directly, and the winter sky eyes had a quality in them that I was not prepared for. Not the assessment of a man looking at a useful resource, but the gaze of someone who had been searching for something specific, and had found it, and was now being honest about what that meant to him. Someone who has spent their entire life learning to see clearly in conditions designed to obscure. I thought about 20 years in the margins, about the graywood and the books, and the knowing and the long, patient practice of watching a world that wanted me gone, and understanding it anyway. The horse moved beneath me, steady and unhurried. "I need to know," I said, "that this is not a different kind of cage." He did not answer immediately. He thought about it, which I respected more than any quick reassurance would have earned. "I cannot promise you that power is not its own kind of enclosure," he said finally. "I can promise you that I will not lock the door." I looked at the road ahead. The sun was fully up now, burning through the last of the morning gray, and the Dravenmoor Pass was visible in the far distance, the dark mountain shape of it, the high, clean line of the fortress city against the sky. Something in my blood that had been running and running and running for 20 years slowed. Not stopped. Not yet. But slowed. And began, very carefully, to consider the possibility of standing still. Chapter 5. We stopped at midday in a village at the edge of the pass. Not Dravenmoor, still border territory, a small settlement called Vithara that sat at the junction of 3 roads and made its living from travelers who needed to eat and rest before the mountain climb. The inn was low-ceilinged and warm, smelling of bread and pine smoke, and the innkeeper looked at Kalen's sigil and found us 3 private rooms and a meal with the particular efficiency of a man who has housed important travelers before and knows the value of not asking questions. I was given the room farthest from the road. It was small, and the ceiling was low, and it had a real bed, not straw, a proper mattress, thick and yielding. And I sat on the edge of it and looked at my own hands for a long moment. Bare feet on a wooden floor. Borrowed cloak folded on the chair. Smoke still faint in my hair. No shoes still. I had been barefoot since the moment I jumped from the wood store roof, and had not once had the mental space to register it as strange until now. Someone knocked. It was Fen. She had shoes, 2 pairs from her own bag, because she had evidently packed with the practical thoroughness of someone who anticipated that circumstances might require providing footwear to rescued persons. She held them out to me without ceremony, assessed my feet, identified the more likely fit, and left without requiring my thanks. I put on the shoes. The meal came shortly after, brought by Fen again, which I suspected said something about how the king's party organized trust around a woman they had just collected from a forest in her sleeping clothes. I ate with the focused attention of someone who had been running for hours and had not eaten since the previous day. The bread was warm and the soup was real, with actual vegetables and meat, not the thin broth I had made for myself most evenings, from whatever the pack discarded. Small things, but small things accumulate. Kalen found me after the meal. He knocked, which I noted, and waited for my response before entering. The room was small enough that the distance between us was immediately intimate, though he managed it the same way he managed everything, with a deliberate quality of presence that somehow prevented it from becoming uncomfortable. "How are you?" he said. The question landed strangely. People had not, as a general principle, asked me this question. "I'm not certain," I said honestly. "I'm trying to determine whether I'm still running, or whether the running has actually stopped." Something in his expression, that controlled, maintained depth, shifted slightly. "It stopped. For now. For now," I repeated. "There are complications ahead," he said. "I won't pretend otherwise." He moved to the window and looked out at the road below. "Kedrick sent a rider back to Keldenmere this morning, to Elder Kovath." I felt the cold of it. What message? That the girl with the Varenzi bloodline is under the protection of the Dravenmore throne. That any further action against her will be treated as an act against the king's authority. He paused. And that a formal inquiry into the deaths of the 6 previous Varenzi descendants will be opened within the month. I was silent for a moment. 6. The 6 before me. The ones who had not survived infancy. The ones who had been entries in a sealed record, evidence of a century-long campaign of eradication that everyone with power had either participated in or chosen not to see. "Kovath will not accept that quietly," I said. "No. He'll reach out to the other elder councils, the ones who have been managing their own versions of this problem." His jaw tightened. "Which is why we need to reach Dravenmore before he can organize a response." "What does a response look like?" "Political, legal, challenges to the king's right to remove a pack member without council approval. Arguments that the Varenzi bloodline represents a threat to territorial stability." He looked at me. "They will use the same arguments they have used for 100 years to justify the same crimes, just with more formal language." I thought about 100 years of sealed records and quiet murders, and the particular machinery of power that maintains itself by categorizing threats before they can categorize themselves. "And what are you going to do?" I said. "Open the archives," he said. "The real ones, the ones my grandmother kept. Present the full history of the Varenzi bloodline to the Territorial Council. What they were, what they did, what the Elder Councils destroyed when they erased them." He paused. "And present you." "Present me." "You are not a historical argument," he said. "You are a living proof. The bloodline survived. 7 generations of deliberate erasure, and it survived." Something moved in his voice, not quite fierce, but adjacent to fierce, the controlled version of it. "That means something. It means the councils were not just wrong. They were wrong, and they failed. Both things matter." I looked at him, at the line of his shoulders against the window light, the careful control of his expression, the winter sky eyes that held their warmth under so many layers of discipline that you had to watch for it specifically to see it. "You're angry," I said. He looked at me. "About the century of it," I said. "Not just about me, about all of them." A long pause. "Yes," he said. The word was small, and the weight of it was enormous. We were quiet for a moment. Outside the inn window, the village road was active. Travelers, merchants, the ordinary traffic of people whose existence was not contested, who moved through the world without having to calculate the danger of being visible. "My mother bargained for my life," I said. "I never knew what she gave them." "I know what she gave them," Kalen said quietly. I went very still. He looked at me steadily. "It's in the Keldenmere records, the ones Kedrick accessed 2 months ago when we identified the pack." He paused. She gave Kovath information about another pack member, someone who had been working against the Elder Council's interests. It was enough to remove a political threat Kovath had been managing for years. He paused again. She hated herself for it. The records indicate she became increasingly isolated afterward. She didn't speak to the woman she had informed on. The woman was exiled. I pressed both hands flat against my knees. My mother, Thesson, quiet and observant, keeping to herself, increasingly isolated. The fever that had been swift and without warning. She didn't die of fever, I said. Kalen said nothing. He did not need to. I sat with it. The shape of my mother's life. What she had paid. What she had become. What the 6 years between my birth and her death had cost her in the daily currency of guilt and grief. She had saved my life with a transaction that broke something in her, and then she had spent 6 years loving me, and then she had been gone, and I had grown up not knowing the price of my own survival. Now I knew. I thought she paid it anyway, whatever it cost her, whatever it made her carry. She had looked at me, at the silver eye and the gold eye, at the mark of something that every force around her was organized to destroy, and she had decided that I was worth the price. "Tell me her name," I said. "The woman she informed on." "Marit," Kalen said. "She was exiled to the Eastern Territories. She's alive. Kadric found her 6 weeks ago." Something in my chest cracked open and reformed into a different shape. "I want to find her," I said. "When this is over, whatever over looks like, I want to find her." "We will," Kalen said. Simple. Certain. Not a promise decorated with conditions or qualifications. Just "we will," in the voice of a man who did not make statements he did not intend to keep. I looked at him and my wolf pressed forward, slow and deliberate, and I let her go slightly further than I had let her go before. Not all the way. Not yet. But further. Chapter 6. We reached the Dravenmoor Pass by late afternoon. The mountain road was narrow and the wind was sharp, and the fortress city appeared incrementally. First the outer walls, then the towers, then the full dark mass of it against the higher peaks, stone the color of old charcoal in the fading light. I had seen it in my books. He was writing quickly. I could not see the letter clearly, but I could see the seal he was reaching for. Not the Dravenmoor seal. A different one. A round seal with a design I recognized with the cold shock of something you have seen in your nightmares. The Caldenmere Elder Mark. He was reaching for it when I said from the doorway, "Counselor Brenwick." He turned. The seal dropped from his hand and hit the table, and the sound of it was very loud in the quiet corridor. He looked at me. His face moved through several expressions very quickly. Surprise, calculation, recovery, and landed on something that was trying to be pleasant and was not quite succeeding. "You should not be in this wing," he said. "I know," I said. "I followed a feeling?" "A feeling." "I tend to trust them," I said. "They have a good record." He looked at me for a long moment. At my eyes, the silver and the gold, with an expression that was not the revulsion of Caldenmere, but was not clean of it either. The expression of someone who has been told, intellectually, that a thing is acceptable and has not yet reconciled that with the older, deeper response. "You will want to consider very carefully," I said, "what you do with that letter." He said nothing. "I'm not threatening you," I said. "I want you to understand that clearly. I am not capable of threatening people. I have spent my entire life as the most threatenable person in any room, and I understand what it feels like, and I will not do it to someone else." I paused. "But I am going to tell the king what I found this morning, because I told him I would tell him everything the knowing brought me, and I keep my promises." I looked at the unfinished letter on the table. "What you do with that information is your decision." I left. I went directly to Kalen. He was in the lower archive with Kadric when I found him. Both of them bent over a long table covered in documents. He looked up when I entered and read whatever was on my face and straightened immediately. I told him what I had found. He was quiet for a long time after. "Brenwick," he said. Not a question. Something in the way he said it, a weight, an old weight, told me this was not entirely a surprise. He has family ties to Caldenmere elders, Kadric said carefully. We knew it was a possibility. It's more than a possibility now, Kaelin said. He may not send the letter, I said. I don't know what he'll do, but Kovath will be expecting to hear from him, and if he doesn't, Kovath will assume we found him, Kaelin said, which means he'll accelerate. He pressed both hands flat against the table. How quickly can we move the council presentation? Kadric made a sound that was not quite a word. 2 days, Kaelin said. Make it happen. Kadric left. Kaelin looked at me across the document-covered table. His expression had the controlled, deep water quality, but beneath it something was shifting, the accumulated pressure of a very long effort reaching its critical phase. Are you ready? He said. I thought about the question. Really thought about it. Not the reflexive yes of someone trained to be agreeable. Not the reflexive no of someone trained to diminish herself. I'm going to stand in front of the Territorial Council and tell them that the bloodline they've been erasing for 100 years is alive and present in this room, I said, and that the Alpha King of Dravenmore brought me here intentionally and stands behind the record of what was done to the people who came before me. Yes, he said, and some of them will have family members in that record. Some of them will be the children or grandchildren of the people who organized the eradication. Yes. And I am a barefoot girl from a border pack who 3 days ago was running through the Greywood in her sleeping clothes. Something broke through the controlled expression. Not the gentle warmth I had seen before. Something fiercer. Something with its own kind of fire. You are the last surviving Varensi, he said. You are the proof of what was done, and the proof that it failed. And you are standing here because you survived 20 years of a world organized against your existence using nothing but your own clarity and endurance. He held my gaze. You are ready. I looked at him. My wolf pressed forward. This time, I let her go. All the way. And the bond, that ancient, fundamental, wolf-deep recognition, unfolded between us like something that had always been present and was simply, finally, allowed to be acknowledged. He felt it. I saw it in the way his breath changed, in the stillness that went through him that was different from his ordinary stillness. Neither of us said anything. We did not need to. The documents lay between us and the archive was quiet, and outside the windows the 7-star sigil burned on every surface of Dravenmore, and above us, somewhere in the cold, clear sky, 7 actual stars were waiting for the dark. Chapter 8. Councillor Brenwick did not send the letter. He came to me instead. The following morning, early, before the household was fully awake, a knock at my chamber door that I had felt coming before I heard it. I opened the door and he was standing in the corridor, with the expression of a man who had spent a sleepless night arguing with himself and arrived, exhausted, at a conclusion he did not entirely want. "May I come in?" he said. Not quite a question. I stepped back. He sat in the chair by the window. I sat on the bed. Outside the window, the morning was clear and cold, and the mountain peaks were sharp against a pale sky. "My mother was born in Caldenmere," he said, without preamble. "She left when she was young, before Kovath's time, before the current council, when things were different in ways I don't have the full record of." He paused. "She never talked about why she left, only that she did." I waited. After she came to Dravenmore, she married into the council family. She was accepted. She built a life. He looked at his hands. She died 3 years ago, and in her things I found a record. A journal. She had kept it for 50 years. The things she knew about Caldenmere, about the Elder Council, about what they had done and were doing. He paused again. She knew about the bloodline. She knew what Kovath's predecessor had done. She wrote it all down, and she never showed anyone. "Why not?" I said. "Because she was afraid," he said. "Because she had built something safe, and she was afraid that speaking would cost her the safety." He met my eyes for the first time. I understood that fear completely. I have been living inside a version of it myself. He looked away. I am on a council where 2 of the 7 seats are held by men with direct ties to Caldenmere's elder families. When the king began his search, I was afraid of what would happen if it succeeded. not because I think the bloodline should be erased, but because I know what those two men will do to protect their families' histories. So you were feeding Kovath information, I said, keeping him prepared. Keeping myself positioned, he said. In case the search succeeded, and I needed... He stopped. It sounds worse when stated plainly. It sounds like someone choosing safety over honesty for long enough that the line between them blurred, I said. I understand the mechanics of that very well. He looked at me again. My mother's journal, he said. I want to give it to the king, before the council presentation. He reached inside his coat and placed it on the windowsill between us. Small, leather-bound, old. It corroborates the archive records. It names names. It is an eyewitness account from someone who was inside the Kaldenmere pack during the early phase of the eradication campaign. I looked at the journal. I thought about a woman who had left a place that wanted to kill what she knew, and built a quiet life, and kept her truth in a book for 50 years, and given it to no one. I thought about a daughter who had grown up not knowing her mother's full story, and found it only in her things after she was gone. I picked up the journal. I'll bring it to him, I said. Brenwick nodded. He stood. At the door he paused, back to me, and said, When she left Kaldenmere, she left because she was protecting someone. A child. He paused. The journal explains. I think it may matter to you specifically. He left. I sat with the journal in my hands. Old leather, soft with handling. The weight of 50 years of kept silence. I opened to the first page, and there, in a careful, precise hand that had clearly once been taught by someone who valued accuracy above all things, was the name at the top of the first entry. This record is maintained by Marit, formerly of the Kaldenmere pack, in the 43rd year of the Drave reign. The room went very still. Marit, the woman my mother had informed on. The woman who had been exiled. The woman Kedrick had found alive in the Eastern Territories 6 weeks ago. Brenwick's mother. I pressed the journal to my chest and closed my eyes and felt the shape of it. The 50-year chain of silence and survival, and fear, and kept records, and what my mother had done, and what Marit had done after, and the daughter and the granddaughter, and the fact that somehow, through all of it, a journal had made its way from a Kaldenmere exile to a Dravenmoor counselor's hands, and from there, finally, to mine. The moon forgets nothing. I held the journal and I breathed, and I let myself feel the full weight of it, not managed, not edited, not pared down to what I could afford to carry. All of it. Then I stood, and I went to find Kaelin. Outside the chamber window, the day was sharp and clear. The presentation was tomorrow. Kovath was moving somewhere, with the urgency of a desperate man. The 2 council members with Kaldenmere ties were in this building, making their own calculations, and I was walking through the corridors of Dravenmoor with a dead woman's journal in my hands and the bond warm and certain behind my sternum, and my wolf was not running, not hiding, not pressing into margins. She was walking upright, in plain sight. Chapter 9. The council chamber was everything the rest of Dravenmoor was. Old, serious, built to last. 7 seats arranged in a horseshoe around a central speaking floor. Stone walls hung with the territorial maps of all 5 wolf domains, not decorative working documents, marked with generations of updates in different colored inks. The ceiling high enough to carry sound cleanly, which I suspected was by design. This was a room where words were meant to travel. The 7 council members filed in and took their seats, and I watched from the floor, not behind a lectern, not elevated, simply standing, and I identified the 2 Kaldenmere-tied seats before anyone spoke. They were not hard to find. They sat with the particular stillness of people who have prepared for a confrontation and have decided to wait and let it come to them. Kaelin entered last. He did not sit in the horseshoe. He stood at the edge of the floor, slightly behind and to my left, which was a deliberate spatial choice, present, supporting, but not the speaker. The speaker was me. He had told me this the previous evening. They need to hear it from you, he said. Not from me presenting you. From you presenting yourself. I have no title, I had said. No formal standing. No pack. You have the bloodline, he said, and my grandmother's record, and Marit's journal, and 20 years of surviving a campaign organized at the highest levels of pack authority. He held my gaze. That is more standing than most people bring to that floor. So, I stood on it. I had not prepared a speech. This was deliberate. I had learned long ago that the knowing worked better when I did not try to script around it, when I left space for the truth to move through me at the pace it needed, rather than the pace I had organized. I looked at the 7 seats. My name is Ziva, I said. I was born in the Caldenmere Pack 20 years ago. 3 days ago, Elder Kovath's men locked my room from the outside and threw a burning torch through the window. I paused. This was not an unusual decision. It was a deferred one. They have wanted to make it since the day I was born. The room was very quiet. I told them the history. Not from the beginning, from my beginning, working outward. What it had been to grow up with the eyes, what the pack's treatment of me had been, and what it had meant, and what it had cost. And then outward, into the record, Kaelin's grandmother's archive, the 6 children before me, the 100-year campaign. Marit's journal, which I had read in full the previous night, which filled the early gaps with an eyewitness's precision. I spoke for a long time. The 2 Caldenmere Tide council members, their names were Aldrich and Voss, and they sat with faces increasingly composed into expressions of controlled neutrality that were doing considerable labor, said nothing while I spoke. I watched them the way I watched everything, completely, from my own center, without flinching. When I finished, Aldrich spoke first. He was older, silver-haired, with the kind of authority that comes from long practice at managing rooms. The Varenzi bloodline, he said carefully, was declared a threat to territorial stability by the Council of 11 Generals in the 3rd generation of the Drave reign. The declaration was made by men whose authority depended on eliminating the Seers, I said. Yes, I read the record. He stopped. The Seers arbitrated the original territorial agreements, I said. They were the check on unchecked authority. The Council of 11 Generals eliminating them was not a protective action. It was a consolidation of power. I looked at him steadily. And it has been maintained for 100 years, not because the bloodline is dangerous, but because its existence is an argument against the structure of authority that replaced the one it once balanced. Aldrich's expression had moved past controlled neutrality into something harder. You are a border wolf with no formal. I am the last Varenzi, I said. The last of 7 children they tried to kill before me. And I am standing here because the Alpha King of Dravenmore has read the full history and found it unacceptable. I held his gaze. Is your objection to what I am, or to what my existence requires you to acknowledge about your family's history? The silence was total. Vossi moved slightly in his seat, and then something happened that I had not anticipated. Vossi stood. He was younger than Aldrich, 40 perhaps, with a face that had not yet fully decided what it wanted to be. He stood, and he looked at me and he said, in a voice that was not comfortable, but was attempting honesty, my grandfather was on the council that ordered the second eradication. I have known this my entire life, and I have never addressed it formally. He paused. I think it is time that I did. Aldrich turned to look at him with an expression that could have cut stone. Voss did not look at Aldrich. He looked at me. I would like, he said carefully, to formally support the reopening of the Varenzi record before this council, and I would like to formally ask the Alpha King to consider what recognition of the surviving bloodline looks like under current territorial law. The room held its breath. Kaelin, from behind me and to my left, said, I have already considered it. He moved to the floor, beside me. Not in front of me, beside, with the specific spatial deliberateness that I had come to understand as one of the primary languages he spoke. The Varenzi record will be formally reopened, he said. The 100-year campaign will be acknowledged by this council and by the territorial record as an act conducted outside the legitimate authority of pack law. He paused. And Ziva of the Varenzi bloodline will be formally recognized as a member of the Dravenmore household under the king's personal protection. Aldrich stood. He was vibrating with contained fury, the kind that comes when a structure you have built your identity on begins to crack. The king does not have the unilateral authority to— "Take your seat, counselor," Kalen said. His voice had not changed. It was the same low, unhurried register it always was. But the room changed. The quality of air in it changed. The 7 stars on the wall behind the horseshoe seemed, in the candlelight, to intensify. Aldrich took his seat, and then the doors at the end of the chamber opened. I felt it before I saw it, a new pressure in the room, something arriving that had not been part of the plan. I turned. Elder Kovath was standing in the doorway. Not alone. Behind him, 3 men. Kaldonmere warriors by their bearing. And beside him, with the specific stiff posture of someone being moved rather than walking voluntarily, a woman I had never seen but recognized immediately, in the bone-deep way of the knowing. The woman was perhaps 50 years old. Dark-haired, gray-threaded, small and precise, and looking at me with the expression of someone who has spent a very long time in the dark and has just seen light. Marit. Kovath had found her before we did. He walked into the room with the confidence of a man who has decided desperate action is his only remaining leverage and has committed to it completely. And he looked at the assembled council and at Kalen, and finally, last, at me. "The girl is a fugitive from Kaldonmere Pack Authority," he said. "Under Interpack law, she is subject to return to her pack of origin for—" "She has no pack of origin," Kalen said. "Kaldonmere's treatment of her for 20 years constitutes abandonment under the same Interpack law you are citing. She has been formally received into the Dravenmore household." He looked at Kovath with the steady, unapologetic attention he gave everything. "And the woman beside you is Maret, formerly of Kaldonmere, who is also under this court's protection as a material witness to the events now under formal council review." Kovath's hand moved toward Marit's arm. "Remove your hand from her," I said. The room turned to look at me. Everyone, including Kovath, including Marit, who was looking at me with an expression that was trying very hard not to become something that would embarrass her in a council chamber. "You don't know," Kovath started. "I know everything," I said. "I have read her journal. I know what my mother paid to keep me alive, and I know what you collected from her, and I know what you did when you decided the debt was settled." I looked at him, and I felt the knowing opening like a door, full and clear, and without the fear that had always narrowed it before. "And I know what you are afraid of right now. It's not me. It's the record. It's what this council will do when the full record is open, and your name is in it, in your own hand, in the documents you thought were sealed." His face had gone the color of old stone. "The documents," Kadric said from the side door he had entered through, holding a sealed folder, "are no longer sealed." The 3 Kaldonmere warriors looked at each other, and Marit, with the small and precise movement of a woman who has been waiting 50 years for this exact moment, stepped away from Kovath's loosened grip. She looked at me across the council chamber. I looked at her. Her eyes were silver. Both of them. Old and clear and burning with the specific light of someone who has kept a truth intact for 50 years through everything that tried to extinguish it. Full-blooded Varenzi. The knowing hit me like a wave. She is not a witness. She is the source. She has been alive this entire time, and she is the reason the bloodline survived. She had not been exiled. She had run. Like I had run. And she had survived. Like I had survived. And my mother had known. My mother had traded information that sent Marit into exile, and simultaneously into safety, out of Kovath's reach, far enough and hidden enough to survive. Not a betrayal. A rescue dressed as a betrayal, because it was the only form a rescue could take in the architecture of that pack. The currency. Now I knew what it was. Chapter 10. Elder Kovath was taken into formal custody before the council session ended. It was not dramatic. Kalen's personal guard moved with the same quiet efficiency that characterized everything in this court. 2 men at the door, the formal pronouncement from Kadric, the specific legal language of Interpack Authority that I had read enough of in the past 3 days to understand, meant there was no appeal Kovath could make before the inquiry concluded. He went without fighting, because men like Kovath do not fight when the room has turned entirely against them. They preserve their dignity and wait for a different leverage point. There would be no different leverage point. The council voted. Voss's motion was seconded by 3 others. The Varenzi record was formally reopened. Aldrich abstained, which was its own kind of statement about a man who could not bring himself to vote against his own family history, but could not, in that room, with those documents on the table, bring himself to defend it either. It was enough. After the council filed out, and Kovath was taken, and the chamber settled into the quiet of something concluded, I stood in the center of the floor and Marit walked toward me. She stopped at a distance that was careful, not afraid, but respectful of the fact that we were strangers with a complicated inheritance, and that the space between us needed to be crossed by choice, not momentum. "I knew your mother," she said. Her voice was low and precise, like her movements. "I know," I said. She stopped, pressed her lips together. "She was the most courageous person I have known in 50 years, and I have met some courageous people." She looked at me steadily. "She loved you in the way that people love things they have decided to protect at any cost." I pressed both hands flat against my legs. "I know what people see when they hear what she did," Marit said. "The informing, the exile. But I want you to understand, she came to me first. She told me what she was going to do and why. She gave me 3 days to prepare, 3 days to gather what I needed and identify where I would go and plan the route I would take." A pause. "She made it look like betrayal so that Kovath would believe it was real, so that he would take the deal and grant the deferral and let you live. And she made it look complete so that he would not keep looking for me." I breathed. "She saved both of us," I said. "Yes." Marit's eyes, silver, both of them, the old full seer blood, were bright with something she was choosing not to call grief in a council chamber. She could not save herself, but she built the architecture very carefully so that both of us would have time. I looked at this woman who was the source of everything, the blood, the history, the record that had survived in a journal for 50 years. The woman my mother had loved enough to protect with the last good thing she had to give. "Are you well?" I said. "Where you've been?" "Well enough," she said. "Alive, which was the point." A ghost of something crossed her face. "Lonely?" "I have been very careful about who I trust for a long time." "You can stop being careful now," I said. She looked at me, at my eyes. Silver and gold, the mixed blood, the diluted inheritance, the proof that the bloodline had split and survived in 2 different directions, and was now, in this room, in this moment, whole again. "Yes," she said. "I believe I can." Kalen came to me when the chamber was empty. He had given me space through all of it, through Marit's arrival and the council vote, and the formal proceedings. With the same deliberate respect, he had given everything. Not distance. Presence, without crowding. We stood in the empty council chamber together. The candles were burning lower. The territorial maps hung on the walls around us, centuries of wolf history in different colored inks. "How are you?" he said. The question that no one had ever asked me, that he had now asked me twice, and would, I understood, keep asking. I paused, finding the honest word. "Full," I said. "I feel very full. Of everything that has happened, and everything that it means, and everything that comes next." I looked at him. "Is that what it feels like when your life starts being real? Just full?" "I think so," he said. "I've been managing it at a controlled distance for so long, I had forgotten what it felt like not to." "When did you stop?" He looked at me steadily. "Forest edge," he said. "Gray morning. Woman with silver and gold eyes standing at the tree line." I held his gaze. The bond between us was warm and settled, and entirely without the desperate urgency I had always associated with the mating bond in the stories I had read. Not a fire, not a storm, but something more like the quality of light in a room where someone has finally opened the curtains after a very long time. Steady, inevitable, deeply, quietly right. "There are things I need to do," I said, "before anything else is decided. I need to go back to Caldenmere. Not to live there, never that, but to stand in that place and close what happened there. For myself." I paused. "And I need to find where my mother is buried and sit with her for a while." "I'll take you," he said. "You have a territory to run." "I have a territory to run," he agreed. "And a Luna who needs to go back to the beginning before she can fully face what comes next. Both things are true, and the second one doesn't wait." He held my gaze. "I'll take you." I thought about the word Luna, about what it meant in his grandmother's record, in the old understanding, before the councils replaced the balance of things with their consolidated power. The wolf who carries what power blinds you to, the other half of a king's judgment, the one who has learned to see clearly in conditions designed to obscure. "I'm going to be difficult," I said. "I will tell you things you don't want to hear. I will read situations in ways that contradict what you're being told by people you trust. And I will not stop doing it because it's inconvenient." "Good," he said. The same quality in it as when he had said I find that interesting, and then stop and all the other plain, undecorated things he said that turned out to hold entire worlds inside them. "And I want Marit here," I said. "Whatever her role is, whatever she wants it to be. She has been alone with what she knows for 50 years, and I want her here. She'll have rooms in the East Wing by morning," he said. I looked at him, at the 7-star sigil, and the winter sky eyes, and the scar, and the deliberate present quality of him that had been, from the first gray morning, the thing my blood called there. My wolf was utterly, completely still. The stillness of arrival, of finding the thing you have been oriented toward your entire life, and standing in its presence and knowing, in the bone-deep, blood-deep way of the knowing, that the search is finished. "Home. What happens now?" I said. "Now," he said, "we open the records. All of them. We present the full history to all 5 territorial councils, and we begin the work of rebuilding what was broken 100 years ago." He paused. "It will be slow. Some of it will be fought at every step. The old power does not give up its architecture easily." "No," I said. "It doesn't. But it can be changed," he said. "Slowly, clearly, by people who are willing to see what is actually there, instead of what is convenient." He held my gaze. "That is what you do." I thought about 20 years of watching from the margins, about the Greywood, and the books, and the twice-yearly packages, and the knowing that had been sharpening itself in the dark for decades, waiting for space and light and purpose. "Then let's start," I said. He offered me his hand. Not formal, not ceremonial, just his hand, open, in the same plain and undecorated way he offered everything. I took it. Outside the High Council windows, the night was deep and clear, and the mountain peaks of Dravenmore were black against a sky so full of stars, it looked like something deliberate, like someone had scattered them specifically, generously, as if to say, "Look, look how many. Look how much light there is in the dark if you know how to find it." 7 of them burned directly overhead. I know. I had been finding my way by them longer than I had known their name. End.